My father once looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't need a job, sweetheart. That's what men are for." That was the moment something inside me broke. I was 25 when he said it. We were standing in the back office of Porter Hardware, the store my grandfather built from nothing. I'd grown up in that place, stacking boxes, balancing ledgers, learning every screw and nail code by heart. My dad, Harold Porter, stood behind his desk with that same cold certainty he always carried, while my brother Colton leaned against the doorframe, smirking like he'd already won something I hadn't even known we were competing for. Dad had just told me he was naming Colton the future owner of the business. He didn't even look at me when he said it. I asked why, even though I already knew the answer. He sighed, rubbed his chin, and said, "Because you're a woman, Riley. You'll get married, have kids. You don't need to worry about work. Colton will handle things." It felt like my chest cracked open. I'd been running that store in silence for years, balancing the books when Colton forgot, making calls when shipments got delayed, calming angry customers when my father lost his patience. I was never supposed to outshine my brother, just quietly hold everything together. My mom, June, stood nearby, pretending to organize papers. She didn't say anything. That's how she handled everything, with silence. When I looked at her, hoping she'd defend me, she just whispered, "Let it go, Riley. It's not worth the fight." But it was worth it to me. I wanted to earn my place, not have it handed to me because of my last name or stolen from me because of my gender. The store wasn't just a business. It was the only thing that made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Colton chuckled and said, "Guess I'm the man of the house now." He slapped my shoulder like it was all a big joke. Dad smiled at him with that same proud look I'd spent my life chasing. It burned. I kept my face still, but something inside me turned to stone. I walked out of that office and into the quiet aisles where the smell of sawdust and metal hung in the air. My hands shook, but my mind was clear. I knew right then that I'd never be chosen. Not in this family. As I stood there, surrounded by shelves I'd built and organized, I realized I didn't want his approval anymore. I wanted something else, something that would make him see what he'd thrown away. He thought I'd just stay quiet, help out, and accept my place. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. He didn't know that when he said those words, "You don't need a job, sweetheart," he wasn't ending my dream. He was creating my reason to fight. The announcement came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. We were sitting around the dining table, the smell of roast chicken still in the air, when my father cleared his throat and said, "It's time we made things official." His voice carried that firm, no questions tone he always used when he'd already made up his mind. I knew something was coming, but I still hoped, just for a second, that maybe this time he'd see me. Maybe he'd notice the work I'd done, all the long nights I'd spent fixing numbers that Colton messed up, all the effort I'd poured into the store that bore our name. But when he turned to Colton and said, "Son, the business is yours," it felt like every bit of hope inside me turned to dust. My fork slipped from my hand and hit the plate. Colton grinned like a kid who just got handed the biggest prize at the fair. "About time," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Guess I'll have to start thinking about expansion." Dad laughed and nodded proudly. "That's my boy. You've got the right spirit." I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind them that Colton barely showed up to work half the time, that he couldn't even balance the register without my help. But I just sat there, staring at my plate, my nails digging into my palm under the table. Mom must have felt the tension because she gave me that look, soft, warning, tired. "Riley," she whispered, "let's just enjoy dinner, okay? Don't make this into a scene." A scene. That's all it ever was to them when I spoke up, a scene. Not fairness. Not truth. Just trouble from a daughter who didn't know her place. Colton turned toward me and said, with that smug smirk I'd come to hate, "Guess you'll have more time now to do, women's stuff. Maybe focus on finding a husband or something." Dad chuckled like it was funny. My mother didn't. She just pressed her lips together, eyes flicking between us like she wanted to disappear. I looked straight at my father and asked, "You really think I'm not capable of running the business?" He didn't even hesitate. "It's not about capable, Riley. It's about what's right. Colton's the man. It's his responsibility to carry the Porter name forward. You'll understand someday." Understand? There was nothing to understand. He decided my worth the moment I was born a girl. The rest of the dinner was quiet except for Colton's bragging about new ideas he had for the store. I didn't say another word. I just kept replaying my father's sentence in my head until it felt carved into my bones. When I went to bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything I'd done. Every late night, every number I'd fixed, every time I'd made things right while Colton messed up. And now it meant nothing. But lying there in the dark, I made myself a promise. One day, my father would see what I was capable of. One day, he'd regret choosing my brother just because he was a man. And when that day came, I wouldn't need his approval. I'd make him watch what he threw away. A few weeks after my father made Colton the new owner, I started noticing strange things in the store accounts. Numbers didn't add up. Payments that should have gone to suppliers were missing, and a few invoices looked like they'd been rewritten. I'd been keeping the books for years, so I knew every cent that came in and out. Something was off, very off. At first, I thought maybe it was just sloppy work. Colton never paid much attention to details, so I figured he might have entered something wrong. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. Money was missing, thousands of dollars. I dug deeper, checking the receipts and the bank statements, and that's when I saw it. Payments were being taken out in cash, marked as equipment maintenance or supply restock. But the amounts were way too high. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew exactly who was behind it. My brother had always been careless with money. He liked shiny things and fast thrills. When he showed up one morning driving a brand new truck, I didn't even need proof anymore. The timing matched too perfectly. I waited until closing time to talk to Dad. He was counting bills at the counter when I said, "Dad, I need to show you something." He looked tired, annoyed, like he already didn't want to hear it. I handed him the printed sheets I'd marked up with red pen. "There's money missing," I said. "Colton's been pulling cash from the business account." I checked everything twice. He scanned the papers, then pushed them back toward me. "You're reading too much into it," he said flatly. "I'm not. Look at the dates, look at the numbers. He's been lying to you." Dad stood up, his voice sharp. "Enough, Riley. You've been bitter ever since I gave him the business. Don't turn that jealousy into accusations." Jealousy. That word hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened. "I'm not jealous, Dad. I'm trying to help. He's stealing from you." He slammed his hand on the counter. "That's your brother you're talking about. You think I don't know my own son?" I wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw the truth, but his face was closed off, cold and final. He didn't believe me. He never would. I gathered the papers, feeling my hands shake. "Fine," I said quietly. "If you want to keep being blind, that's on you." I left the store that night and didn't go back. For days, I couldn't sleep. The betrayal burned so deep it almost felt like grief. I had given everything to that business, and now both my father and brother had thrown it in my face. One morning, I got up, dressed, and decided I was done waiting for their respect. I found a rival hardware company a few towns over, Drayton Supply, and applied under a different last name. They hired me as an accountant within a week. I never told my family where I worked. I didn't want my father's name following me anymore. For the first time, I was free and angry enough to build something that would one day make them see exactly who they underestimated. Working at Drayton Supply was the first time I felt like I actually belonged somewhere. The owner, Evan Drayton, was nothing like my father. He was straightforward, honest, and believed hard work mattered more than last names. He didn't care that I was a woman, or that I'd come from a family business. He only cared that I did the job right. At first, I kept quiet and focused on my work. I handled the accounting, organized invoices, and made sure every number matched down to the cent. Evan noticed that pretty quickly. One afternoon, he stopped by my desk and said, "You don't miss a thing, do you?" I thought I was in trouble, but then he smiled. "That's rare around here. Keep it up." It felt strange to be recognized like that. No one had ever said something like it to me before, not sincerely. From then on, he trusted me with more. Soon I wasn't just doing the books. I was helping with orders, comparing supplier prices, and even suggesting ways to save costs. Every time I came up with an idea that worked, Evan gave me credit in front of everyone. Over time, he started showing me things beyond my job. He taught me how to read market trends, how to talk to suppliers, how to spot when a deal sounded too good to be true. I listened to every word, soaking it all in. I didn't tell him about my past or who my family was. I wanted to build something on my own, not because of them, but despite them. Evan treated his workers like people, not tools. When one of the warehouse guys had to leave early for his kid's game, Evan covered for him without complaint. "Family first," he'd say. It made me realize how different leadership could look. 2 years passed faster than I expected. By then, I was practically running half the operation without being asked. Customers came to me with questions. Suppliers called me directly. Evan noticed, of course. One evening, when we were closing up, he said, "You ever think about running your own place?" The question caught me off guard. I laughed it off, but he just nodded seriously. "You've got the brains and the backbone for it, Riley. You'd be good at it." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about his words. I started to see it clearly, my own store, my own rules, no one telling me I wasn't enough. From that day on, I began saving every dollar I could. No fancy clothes, no nights out, nothing extra. Every paycheck was another step toward the future I was building in secret. I didn't know when or how it would happen, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't done. My father thought he'd kept me small by shutting me out, but all he'd really done was light the fire that would one day burn down his kingdom. The call came on a cold morning. I was at work, going over invoices, when my phone buzzed. It was my father. His voice was low, shaky. "Riley," he said, "your mother's gone." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He said it like he was talking about the weather, flat, distant, but I could tell he was holding something back. I drove home the next day. The small Kansas town I'd left behind looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Everything seemed quieter, heavier. The funeral was simple, just close family and a few neighbors who brought casseroles and sad smiles. I stood by the grave, staring at the flowers on my mother's casket, wondering if she ever knew how much I'd wanted her to stand up for me. I think she did deep down. She just didn't know how. Colton showed up late, wearing a shiny black suit that practically screamed money. I knew right away it was new. He hugged Dad, shook a few hands, then caught me staring. "What?" he said, smirking. "It's called dressing with class." I didn't answer, but I noticed the expensive watch on his wrist too. I'd seen that model before. It wasn't cheap. After the burial, we went back to the house. The air inside felt thick with tension. Dad poured himself a drink and sat in his usual chair like the day hadn't just torn a hole through the family. I stayed standing, unsure if I should leave or say something. He looked at me over his glass and said, "Colton's been doing a fine job keeping the business alive. You should be grateful for men like him. They carry the family on their backs." I almost laughed. "Grateful?" I said quietly. "You think I should thank him for stealing from you?" His eyes hardened. "Don't start, Riley. Not today." I bit my tongue. There was no point arguing, but the words echoed in my head, keeping the business alive. I doubted that. The next day, I drove past the store. The parking lot was half empty, and the shelves inside looked bare through the windows. A couple of customers were walking out, shaking their heads. I went inside, pretending to browse. The cashier looked tired and told another worker they were out of stock again. I felt my chest tighten. My father's proud empire was crumbling, and he didn't even see it. Colton wasn't saving anything. He was bleeding it dry. I could almost picture the accounts, money missing, debts piling up, suppliers refusing to deal with them. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a long time, staring at the building. The paint was peeling. The sign was faded. The whole place looked like a ghost of what it used to be. I thought about my mother, how she'd spent her life keeping the peace, how she'd begged me not to cause drama. But peace had gotten us nowhere. That night, as I drove back to my apartment, I made a silent promise. I wasn't going to watch them destroy everything while pretending I was powerless. I'd build something stronger, smarter, and unshakable. And when the time came, they'd see exactly what it cost them to underestimate me. I opened my store on a quiet Monday morning. The sign above the door read Iron Root Supply, painted in deep green letters I chose myself. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine. Every shelf, every nail, every price tag, I had planned it all down to the smallest detail. It stood just 5 miles from my father's store, close enough that he'd see the name every time he drove through town. I'd spent months preparing. The savings I'd built from my job at Drayton Supply went into renting a small building and filling it with stock. Evan helped me connect with reliable suppliers and even lent me his old delivery truck. My first few customers were people who remembered me from my father's store. They smiled when they saw me behind the counter, surprised but happy. At Iron Root, I treated everyone like they mattered. I didn't charge extra for help or talk down to anyone like my father used to. If a customer needed advice, I gave it. If they couldn't afford something, I found them an option that worked. Word started to spread faster than I expected. Within weeks, new faces were coming in every day. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. People talked, and the talk was good. "That girl knows what she's doing," they'd say. "Her prices are fair, and she actually listens." It was everything I'd wanted my father to see in me. But now, it didn't matter if he did. It wasn't long before I heard he was furious. A supplier told me Harold Porter had been yelling on the phone, accusing them of betrayal for doing business with me. Apparently, Colton had quit showing up again, and the shelves at Porter Hardware were nearly empty. Customers who'd once been loyal to my father's store were now coming to mine instead. One afternoon, he showed up at Iron Root. I was helping a customer find the right kind of drill bits when I saw him through the window. He looked smaller, somehow older. Still, his eyes burned with anger as he stepped inside. "So this is what you've been doing," he said. "Stealing from your own family." I finished with my customer before answering. "No, Dad. I built something on my own." He shook his head, voice rising. "You're ungrateful. After everything I gave you, this is how you repay me? Trying to destroy your brother's business? Destroy your family." His words didn't sting like they used to. I looked at him calmly and said, "You destroyed it the day you told me I couldn't be more than your daughter." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he turned and walked out without another word. When the door closed behind him, I stood there in the quiet, surrounded by the store I had built with my own 2 hands. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's daughter or someone's disappointment. I felt like exactly who I was meant to be. The first sign of trouble came from a customer who used to shop at my father's store. He came into Iron Root one morning and said, "You hear about Colton? Folks say he's in deep with some bad people." I didn't respond, but my stomach turned. I had a feeling it was true. Within weeks, more stories started spreading around town. Colton was gambling again, poker nights, betting on races, anything that promised quick money. When that didn't pay off, he started borrowing against the store. I knew what that meant. He was using the business as collateral, pulling out loans he'd never be able to repay. I didn't go looking for details, but they found me anyway. One of the suppliers who had switched to working with me mentioned that Porter Hardware hadn't paid their last few invoices. "Your brother's been making excuses," he said quietly. "We might have to cut him off." I just nodded. There wasn't much else to say. Meanwhile, Iron Root was busier than ever. The parking lot was full most days, and I had to hire 2 extra workers to keep up with orders. Every sale, every new customer felt like proof that I'd done the right thing. But part of me couldn't stop thinking about the other store, my father's store, slowly sinking while mine rose. Then came the day I knew would change everything. A man in a suit came to Iron Root asking if I knew how to reach Colton. I told him I didn't. He sighed and said, "Well, when you see him, tell him the bank wants its money back." That was how I learned the business had been used to cover Colton's debts. Not long after, creditors started showing up at my father's door. He still refused to believe any of it. He blamed the suppliers, the customers, even me. "You've been stealing our customers," he said one afternoon when I saw him in town. "You're the reason we're struggling." I didn't argue. I could see the fear behind his anger. He still couldn't accept that his golden son had destroyed everything. But the truth didn't care about his pride. A few weeks later, Colton disappeared. Word was he'd been caught taking money directly from the company account, embezzling, plain and simple. And when it all came out, he ran. I heard about it from one of the old employees. "Your dad's been sitting in the office all day," he told me. "He looks lost." Out of curiosity, I drove past the store. The lights were off. The sign was crooked. Through the front window, I saw my father sitting behind the counter with his head in his hands. For the first time in my life, he didn't look proud or certain. He just looked broken. I sat in my truck for a long moment, watching him. A part of me felt sad, but another part, deep inside, felt something else. He was finally seeing the truth he'd refused to face, and it wasn't me who'd destroyed his legacy. It was the son he'd chosen instead. It happened on a quiet afternoon. The store was calm, sunlight coming through the big front windows, when I heard the bell over the door ring. I looked up from the counter and saw my father standing there. For a second, I thought I was imagining him. He looked nothing like the man I grew up with. His shoulders were slumped, his clothes wrinkled, and his face seemed older than I remembered. He stood there, staring around at the shelves, the customers, the logo on the wall, Iron Root Supply. I could see the pain in his eyes as he took it all in. This was the kind of place he'd once told me I could never run. Now it was all that was left. He walked up to the counter slowly, his voice low and rough. "Riley," he said. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't say anything at first. My hands froze over the paperwork I'd been doing. He went on, almost whispering. "The bank took the house. The store's gone. I sold everything I could." His words shook. "Your brother, he's gone. I don't even know where." He swallowed hard, then looked at me with tired eyes. "You're my daughter. You're all I have left." For a long time, I didn't move. Hearing him say those words should have felt good. It should have felt like some kind of victory. But instead, it just hurt. I remembered every time he'd brushed me aside, every time he told me I couldn't, every time he looked through me like I didn't matter. And now he was standing here, asking for help. I finally said, "What do you want, Dad?" He looked down. "I need work. Anything. Just until I can get back on my feet." There was a lump in my throat, but I kept my voice steady. "I can give you something small. Stocking shelves, unloading shipments." His face tightened. "You mean as a clerk?" "Yes," I said. "It's the only position open." He stood there for a long moment, pride and shame fighting inside him. I could almost see it. The man who used to order everyone around now being forced to ask for a chance. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "If that's what you're offering." I handed him a simple form to fill out. He didn't look at me while he wrote, and when he gave it back, his hands were shaking. I showed him where the uniform shirts were kept and introduced him to the staff. No one said much. They all knew who he was. As I watched him walk toward the stockroom, head down, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, pity, and something close to peace. The man who once ruled over me now worked under my roof. He'd built his world on pride and lost it all, while I'd built mine on the very thing he said I could never have: strength. And now he finally had to see it for himself. My father came in early on his first day. He didn't say much, just nodded when I told him where the boxes needed to go. He moved slower than the others, his steps heavy, his back bent from years of hard work and pride that no longer had anywhere to rest. He avoided my eyes, and I let him. I didn't treat him special, and I didn't treat him cruelly either. He was just another worker now, stocking shelves, sweeping aisles, loading supplies in the back. The other employees knew who he was. Some had worked with me long enough to have heard the story. They were polite but distant. No one wanted to embarrass him, but everyone watched. Customers sometimes recognized him too. I'd see their eyes widen when they realized the man in the worn uniform stacking paint cans used to own the biggest hardware store in town. They whispered to each other, pretending not to stare. My father heard them. His hands always tightened a little when he did, but he never said a word. I thought at first that he might quit. He didn't. Every day he showed up, kept his head down, and did his job quietly. The pride that used to fill his voice was gone. The man who once stood tall behind his own counter now asked me for instructions, his voice soft and unsure. I didn't gloat or remind him who was in charge. I just gave him tasks and moved on. Weeks went by like that. One afternoon, I caught him watching me while I was helping a customer. He looked almost lost, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. After the customer left, he said quietly, "You're good at this." I nodded. "I know." He gave a small, sad smile. I guess I should have seen it sooner. I didn't answer. He went back to stacking boxes, shoulders sagging. From then on, he worked harder, like he was trying to earn something that couldn't be earned anymore. Sometimes I'd find him fixing things around the store that weren't even broken, just to keep busy. One evening, after closing, I was counting the register when I heard him say my name. He stood by the counter, holding his cap in his hands. His eyes looked wet and tired. "Riley," he said, voice shaking, "I should have picked you." For a moment, the store was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the lights. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man who used to tower over me, but a broken version of him. One who finally understood what he'd done. I took a deep breath. "You didn't pick me because you couldn't see me," I said. He looked down at the floor, like the weight of the words hit him. There was nothing else to say. He nodded once and walked toward the door. When it closed behind him, I turned off the lights and stood there in the dark for a long time, the echo of his voice still in my ears. I didn't feel anger anymore, just the quiet truth that he had finally seen what I had known all along. Years passed and life moved on, though the memories of everything that happened never really left. Iron Root grew faster than I ever expected. What started as one small store turned into several locations across the state. I hired good people, the kind who cared about customers and treated them like neighbors. Every new store opening felt like a quiet victory, not against my father anymore, but for the woman he once said could never succeed. My father still worked for me, though only part-time now. His hands had grown slower, his hair thinner, and his once sharp voice had turned soft. I paid him enough to live comfortably, but he refused to take more than what he earned. He rented a small house on the edge of town. Nothing like the big one he used to own, but he seemed content with it. Sometimes I'd see him sitting on the porch when I drove by, staring at the fields like he was thinking about another lifetime. We didn't talk much about the past. There wasn't anything new to say. We had found a quiet sort of peace, one where we didn't fight or blame each other anymore. He would come to work, do his job carefully, and leave before closing time. I made sure the other workers treated him with respect, though they all knew who he was. I never introduced him as my father, just Harold. Somehow that felt right. There were days when he'd pause to watch me go over schedules or talk with suppliers, and I could see something in his eyes, pride mixed with regret. He didn't need to say anything, the silence said enough. Once in a while, he'd try to give advice, out of old habit. I'd listen politely, thank him, and then keep doing things my way. He'd smile faintly, knowing I didn't need his guidance anymore. Time softened us both, but the space between us never fully closed. He'd lost everything that had once made him feel strong, and I'd built something from the pieces he left behind. I didn't hate him anymore, but I never forgot the girl I used to be, the one he dismissed without a second thought. One evening, after closing the main store, I walked through the aisles alone. The shelves were full, the lights warm, and the hum of the coolers filled the air. This place had once been a dream, a stubborn idea I refused to let die. Now it was my empire. Before locking the door, I looked out through the glass at the parking lot glowing under the streetlights. My father's truck was still there. He was probably finishing some paperwork in the back. I smiled a little, thinking about how far things had come. He used to say men build empires. But standing there, keys in hand, I realized the truth. I had built mine from the ashes of his. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the cool night air. The world felt quiet and wide open, and for the first time in my life, everything that had ever hurt me had turned into something that finally set me free.